Our last panel of the APAICS Tech Summit is Striking a Balance, Promoting Digital Wellness, Trust, and Safety. Digital wellness, trust, and safety have become critical concerns in today's increasingly connected world. This panel will explore the challenges and strategies in promoting digital well-being, fostering trust in online interactions, and ensuring the safety and security of digital environments. Panelists will discuss the impact of technology on mental health, efforts to combat mis- and disinformation, and strategies for building a healthier and safer digital ecosystem. Join me in welcoming our moderator for this panel, Zaki Barzinji. Zaki is a senior director for Aspen Digital, where he oversees a range of projects at the intersection of tech, policy, equity, and justice for underrepresented communities. Just prior to joining the Aspen Institute, Zaki worked as the head of state and local government affairs for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, where he partnered with governors and mayors across the country to close the digital divide, modernize tech policy, and leverage emerging technology to rebuild a more resilient and equitable digital infrastructure for all communities in a post-pandemic world. His writing and commentary have appeared in Politico, The Atlantic, BuzzFeed, Washington Post, CNN, and a variety of other platforms. Please join me in welcoming Zaki and our final group of panelists for the day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our APAICS Tech Summit session called Striking a Balance, Promoting Digital Wellness, Trust, and Safety. My name is Zaki Barzinji, and I'll be your moderator for this exciting session. I'm the Senior Director of Empowered Communities at Aspen Digital, which is a program of the Aspen Institute, where I lead our portfolio of work that focuses on the intersection of tech, equity, justice, and representation for marginalized and underserved groups. And it's that exact intersection that we're here to discuss today. The rapid pace of innovation and emerging technology presents more exciting opportunities than ever to rebuild our world, more than most of us could ever have even imagined. At the same time, if our shared future is only built by and for a select few, it will only truly serve a select few. And communities will be in danger of getting more left behind than ever. At the root of responsible innovation is the trust our communities have in the development of new products, services, and policies around emerging technology. Without trust, there can be no inclusion. And without inclusion, we cannot ensure the safety and wellness of all of our communities, including those of us from Asian American, Native, Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. So with that said, let's dig into it. We've got a truly tremendous panel assembled today who come from a wide variety of backgrounds. I'll read all their names and then we will hear from each of them in turn. So our panelists today are Pooja Kondabolu, who's a global trust and safety policy lead at Airbnb, Jenny Liu, the policy manager for technology and telecommunications at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, Kyle Van Fleet, communications associate at APIA Vote, and last but not least, Jill Yu, the co-founder and board member of Act to Change. Thank you all for being with us today for this exciting conversation. Let's start out with a high-level, big-picture, general question. Would love to hear from each of you who you are, what work you do on this topic, and what exactly is digital wellness, trust, and safety to you all, and how does your own work impact it? Pooja, let's start with you.
Great, thanks, Zaki. Hi, everyone. My name is Pooja Kondabolu, and as Zaki mentioned, I work on trust and safety issues as it relates to the company's public policy and communications priorities. And for those of you who are not familiar with Airbnb, it's a leading online marketplace that connects guests with potential hosts who are letting out their home on a short or long-term basis. At its core, Airbnb really aims to create human connection and build belonging. With over 1.4 billion all-time guest survivals in 220 plus countries and regions, Airbnb has thrived because it is built on trust. And to your question, our approach to building trust and safety has three guiding principles. Education, we help hosts and guests know how to use Airbnb and what to expect when they do. Safety, promoting safe experiences for our community as they live, work, host, and travel on Airbnb, and support, assisting hosts, guests, and other stakeholders in the rare event something doesn't go as planned. Thanks.
Thanks, Pooja. Jenny, can I pass it to you?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jenny, and I manage our Mis and Disinformation Project portfolio at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. So our work there primarily focuses on documenting and analyzing how mis and disinformation uniquely impacts the Asian American community. And so this is both mis and disinfo that circulates at the expense of our community. So thinking about, for example, conspiracies around COVID-19 and a lot of the rhetoric that was used at the beginning of the pandemic targeting our communities. But this also includes mis and disinformation that circulates among our communities in various Asian languages. So for us, digital wellness, trust, and safety really means building up safeguards that are allowing members of our community to reap the benefits of technology while simultaneously being protected from its various potential harms, especially given how much of modern society takes place online these days. And so, of course, tying it back to our work, the prevalence of mis and disinformation online definitely undermines the ability of Asian Americans to feel trust and safety online and have overall digital wellness. So definitely looking forward to diving a little bit more into this topic with my fellow panelists today.
Thanks, Jenny. Kyle?
Hey everyone, I'm Kyle Van Fleet. I am the Communications Associate at Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote, pronouns he, him. API Vote, in case you all are unaware, is the nation's leading nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to engaging, educating, and empowering our communities to create change through civic engagement. And of course, we are not really able to do that if there's increasing mis and disinformation, right? So as a communications associate, part of my job is monitoring kind of different narratives related to democracy, voting rights, elections, as well as narratives pertinent to API communities. That includes narratives targeted towards us and narratives that are about our communities. And so at API Vote, we work kind of as a middleman between our network of API organizations, communities, thought leaders, and the broader disinformation monitoring network to kind of ensure that our API communities kind of have a better idea of what's being talked about online. And then those at the national level kind of understand what's being said in local API kind of networks, right? So in terms of digital wellness, trust, and safety, for us, the tenets to this is just a healthy experience online, knowing you have security and privacy, as well as the ability to know what you're consuming is ethical and reliable. And obviously that's where disinformation comes in, because there is a lot of stuff online that is not ethical or reliable. And, this, detrimentally impacts individuals, and it can lead to, depression, anxiety on one end, but more importantly, it can also lead to radicalization. Tears families apart and can tear communities apart and makes us all more unsafe. So here at API Vote, when we are talking about disinformation, it's not necessarily about, fact checking something. It's keeping our communities informed and safe.
Thanks, Kyle. Super helpful roundup. Jill, can we hear more about your work and its intersection?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Apex. I'm so glad to be here today. So I'm Jill Yu. I am one of the co-founders and one of the board members of a national nonprofit, Act to Change. Essentially, our nonprofit is striving to end bullying for Asian American and Pacific Islander API youth. I think like the best way to approach this answer of what is digital wellness is to explain a little bit about like what our vision for the world is. So we were started in 2015 under President Obama, then as a campaign to educate the nation on what is bullying, but also what is bullying as it relates to like the cultural barriers, like the effects of it, how it looks uniquely to our AAPI youth. So our vision for the world essentially is where all youth, including within the AAPI community, have the opportunity to grow up feeling proud and supported in the development of their identity and share sharing of their stories. We hope to do this through empowering students by advocating for systemic change and providing resources to promote healthy communities. So when I think about digital wellness, it aligns very perfectly with our vision for the world, because digital wellness is essentially a state of mental, physical, and social emotional health well-being, something where we can feel that we can be our authentic self, be proud of who we are, no matter whether it's on technology, in person, but definitely through our interactions through media.
Thanks, Jill, and thank you all so much for those introductions. I think that this is such a unique and interesting panel because each of you is tackling this work head on, but from pretty different angles and serving different communities. Jill, obviously, you approach this from a youth perspective. Kyle, from an elections and democracy perspective. Jenny, from a civil rights perspective. And Pooja, obviously, from the private sector, from the tech sector. So it's really, I think, fascinating to have all these different viewpoints to compare and contrast, because I think a lot of times you don't necessarily see these issues from all these different angles at once. So just to stay on that topic, a lot of these phrases that we're using, digital wellness, trust and safety, a lot of them are pretty buzzwordy. I think you all did a very good job of giving us your definitions or your view on what these terms mean in it from a digital stance. But I want to get a little bit more deeper into sort of how your specific communities are affected by it. Jill, maybe we'll start with you, since we just heard from you. You specifically work with youth and support youth in an environment where I think trust and safety, especially when it comes to the digital realm, is supercharged. There's a lot of talk now about young people and the effects that the digital space has on them. And also, we've heard criticisms in the past that a lot of ways in which policies and companies try to address protecting kids' wellness online is by often taking a very paternalistic approach rather than a rights-based approach to uplift young people. So just curious to hear from you a little bit more about, as you work with young people, what are some of the trends you're seeing? How do they perceive the importance of digital well-being and wellness, and how does their empowerment maybe enhance and promote their safety and well-being?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think one thing that we've noticed, so we have a program called our Youth Ambassadors Program, where we recruit and highlight youth who are already doing not only amazing things in their communities, but have demonstrated leadership in really making change and honestly countering hate and harassment and bullying head on in their community. One of the As a national nonprofit, we're trying to elevate youth voices so that youth who are actually living these experiences are speaking to each other and also giving each other that nurturing and that social support system. So one thing that we've noticed from the youth is their desire to take ownership of these medias, because in this day and age, they have to be involved in these digital platforms in order for them to advance, to have access to technology. I was an adjunct professor. This reminds me anecdotally of how I was engaging with the youth, and across all my students, they all had iPads and they all were interacting with each other and engaging with each other on social media. And I do remember one of them mentioning that if you're not on social media, you don't really exist. You're not quite relevant. And it made me cock an eyebrow, because one, it made me wonder, what does my social media platform look like? But also two, what does that mean to them? Like, how are they utilizing a platform in a safe way? So with our youth ambassadors, a couple years ago, they decided to take back, especially during Black Lives Matter movement, and really figure out how can we be empowered and counter misinformation, but also be competent and respectable activists. Many of the things that they've noticed online, sometimes it's very performative. You have TikTok dances, you say you're going to be standing against a certain issue, but it's all just talk. They created a toolkit called Racism a Virus Toolkit, and I'm actually looking at it right now because they have a chapter here that the youth authored for youth, and it's called From Screen to Streets, Engaging in Digital Activism. So they've taken this and essentially written it out so that they're talking to youth about how do you find accurate information? That's one. Two, how do you utilize the platforms to the benefit of the community? So you are making change makers, but also in a healthy and productive way. And three, how do you make sure you're supporting each other? Because the social media platforms, whether it's TikTok, whether it's like the newest platform on the street, there could be an attraction to folks who are trying to tear you down, trying to bully you, trying to find ways to harass you, to counter your language. But how can you, as a youth and as parents as well, how do we support each other and spot those symptoms? So anyways, do recommend folks like take a look at it on our website. That's like a quick plug, but like I've noticed like the youth, they have been observing that the social media platforms can be affecting them, perhaps like their mental health, but there's also a way to take back their power and use it for a way to actually make change.
Thanks, Jill. That's really helpful. And especially, there's all these conversations that are happening about youth without youth in the picture. So I think it's fantastic anytime we have efforts like yours to bring youth themselves into the conversation so that we're not just talking about them and making products and policies around them. Pooja, just to turn to you, I think it's not often that you often get the community's perspective on emerging technology and wellness, and you have the industry's perspective. It's harder to kind of come together in a central place and bring together both the tech sector and the community perspectives and how to move forward on some of these issues. I think Airbnb seems to have a pretty good model in the past of taking a stab at bringing communities to the table and making sure that their individual needs are being served, and by extension, their trust and safety and their wellness are affected. Just curious if you could tell us from your perspective at Airbnb, what are some things that you all have done to kind of improve those relationships and improve representation and, by extension, improve trust and safety?
Sure, thanks for the question. Yeah, I'd like to talk about one of our projects called Project Lighthouse. And basically, what we realized was an important step in our continued fight against discrimination is understanding when and how it happens. So in 2020, Airbnb launched Project Lighthouse, which helped to uncover and address disparities in how people of color experience Airbnb. We developed the initiative in partnership with Color of Change and guidance from other civil rights organizations, such as Asian American Advancing Justice, which is represented today by Jenny, Center for Democracy and Technology, and other such organizations, to make sure we do this important work in a way that's both thoughtful and respectful of everyone's privacy while bringing various stakeholders to the table. And in 2022, we shared a 6-year update on our work to fight discrimination and build inclusion. And we formed an internal anti-discrimination and equity team at Airbnb, which includes dedicated professionals such as data scientists, engineers, to lead our work on inclusion-focused programs. We also created a specialized community support team to investigate and take action on reports of discrimination by hosts and guests. We eliminated guest profile photos prior to booking, so hosts only see a guest photo after they've accepted their booking guest. We've made more people eligible to use Instant Book, which doesn't require a host approval and creates more objective bookings. We also expanded educational resources and developed and scaled global programs like the Airbnb Entrepreneurship Academy to build a more inclusive travel community. So, in summary, I think we've brought a bunch of stakeholders and experts to the table to kind of guide this important work with the humility to know that we constantly need to get feedback to iterate.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Pooja. And, I just think that, if folks, do some research on this, they'll see that Airbnb was really one of the first major tech companies to take the step of having an independent civil rights audit. And a lot of tech companies afterwards followed suit. And so it takes a lot of, I wouldn't say courage, but it takes a lot of trust for a company to put themselves out there to potentially get negative feedback, but it also demonstrates that their willingness to improve their services, improve their platforms, and be better custodians of all types of communities of users that might be using their platforms. So thanks for sharing that experience. Jenny, I was wondering if we could go to you next. to tell us a little bit from your perspective at AAJC, ways in which information harms communities and how mis and disinformation in particular can degrade trust in information. I know that you're doing a lot of work on this topic, so we'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question. So focusing on trust and how it erodes in an environment where mis and disinformation proliferates, I think one of the biggest dangers posed by false information is that people have less faith broadly in all information, regardless of whether or not it's accurate. So there's definitely a difference between evaluating a news story or a photograph or something that you see online with a healthy degree of skepticism and wondering what the source is from, what the dates are, when it was published, things like that, and just broadly not trusting or believing that anything that you see online is accurate. And unfortunately, with the emergence of generative AI, which I know we're going to touch on more in depth later on in this conversation, that's something that's making this a lot worse, specifically with the prevalence of deepfakes and different kinds of AI generated content that's not accurate and is not actually what it purports to be out there, that's flooding overall the information ecosystem and making people more skeptical of what the kinds of different things that they see online. So from our perspective, in order to kind of reestablish this trust that's eroded and been broken down, we really focus on putting out accurate information within our communities while attempting to inoculate against the specific falsehoods and mis and disinformation that we see out there.
Thanks, Jenny. And I think we'll use that as just to follow up and maybe lead us into a slightly different area. You described sort of misinformation, disinformation. Kyle, I know you obviously work on this a lot, especially from your perspective from the democratic institution side. But Jenny, just staying with you for a second, how do these issues affect mental well-being? How does technology and misinformation affect the ways in which, especially folks from our communities, interact with the digital world and the real world as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think, as with most things, technology has the potential to both boost people's mental well-being, right? With the pandemic, we saw the prevalence of a lot of telehealth services, for example, that brought a lot of technology related to therapy and things of that nature and made them more accessible to people who probably previously did not have the resources to access them. But the converse of that is that I think with the prevalence of everything being more and more online these days and a 24 hours news cycle, there's this pressure to be really perpetually online and this fear of kind of missing out on what's going on and relevant current events, because there's just this constant influx of information that people are presented with, that it really results in this phenomenon of information overload and doom scrolling and just increased anxiety, I think, that definitely impacts all populations, but the Asian American community in particular. And I think to kind of further elaborate on that, with the prevalence of this fast-paced nature of technology and the need for instant gratification and a lot of these factors that really create perfect environments for mis and disinformation to thrive, of people only reading headlines or clickbait articles or different kinds of representations of news stories that obscure the actual reality of what's being portrayed, there definitely is a really negative impact on people's mental health. And unfortunately, we all often see that also bleeding into harms on physical well-being as well. So thinking about incidents like January 6th or stories of people rejecting life-saving vaccines to seek out vaccine alternatives and then ending up in the hospital, right? So there are definitely real world and like tangible physical consequences, in addition to the consequences of people's mental health on things like conspiracy theories, falsehoods, and just this general degradation of the quality of information that's out there online right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kyle, I think that actually leads directly into sort of your work specifically at the intersection of democratic institutions and mis and disinformation. Curious just to hear your thoughts on, how does technology affect mental well-being from that perspective? What are the dangers of misinformation, disinformation? Does it affect trust in democratic institutions? How does this all kind of layer up when you examine it from your angle with the API vote?
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate something Jenny said, I think it's important to note that technology really can help people stay connected to their social ties, find community, important resources, which can decrease, loneliness, social isolation, and enhance mental health and well-being. But of course, people are only a few clicks away from going down dangerous rabbit holes and connecting with the wrong types of folks, including conspiratorial fringe figures. And so the way algorithms are built is really meant to tailor our feeds to the kind of stuff it believes we'll find interesting enough to engage with. But it also doesn't take a lot of engagement with problematic content for it to start being more heavily promoted in your feed. And, this harmful content is profitable for social media companies. And the problem is they know it. And these rabbit holes easily lead to radicalization, and it puts you in an alternate reality that obviously impacts your mental well-being. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, it has the potential to tear families and communities apart. And of course, in the real world, has the potential to do things as much as try and hinder our democracy in a very real way. Needless to say, the events of January 6th, I think, are a perfect example of that. Just to throw out some stats that I kind of think show the state of things. There's only 40% of Americans that have a great deal of confidence that the next presidential election will be counted accurately. There's only 30%. There are 30% of Americans that still believe the 2020 election was stolen. And there are only 38% of Americans that say democracy is actually working in the United States. So obviously the rise in disinformation, far right fringe figures, and all that kind of conspiratorial stuff obviously it takes a toll on people's mental well-being by making them so scared, fearful, angry about, the world around them. But fortunately, there has been a lot of anti-disinformation efforts. That's what we do it here at API Vote. I know Jenny can say the same. And, it's a whole coalition of groups. And there was a study actually published in the Nature Human Behavior Journal earlier this year. And it found that in 2020, 26% of Americans were exposed to untrustworthy websites in 2020. And that is down from 44% in 2016. So these efforts do work, the efforts to inoculate voters, to encourage social media companies to have important guardrails, but that still means that 26% is still 68 million Americans visiting untrustworthy websites. So there's still a lot of work to do, but I'm definitely hopeful about the path forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was very informative, especially when you drop the stats on us. Jill, can I bring you in to talk about impact on youth in particular?
Yeah, I'm gonna follow Kyle with the stats train, because I think to overlay that what you just shared, how the misinformation, what's going out there is also affecting, of course, our youth. We issued a 2021 bullying survey in light of what was going on with the rise of anti-Asian hate after, of course, during COVID pandemic. And the key findings were pretty disheartening. So of our youth that submitted in the survey, 80% of our Asian American youth experienced bullying in person or online. 70% of our Asian Americans experienced or witnessed an increase in cyberbullying in 2020. Sharing this information because in light of the greater context of what's going on outside, with this hate rhetoric of what's going on, the ripple effects, the reactions of our youth, they're the ones who are also experiencing it, who are being subjected to it. I think it's just appalling. I'm thankful that we have partners such as Airbnb who are trying to find ways to maintain safety, for families, for youth, and for everybody out there who are accessing things digitally. But unfortunately, there are still those folks who are just targeting our youth, especially those who present as Asian American and Pacific Islanders. So just wanting to throw those numbers out also, that I think I'm hoping it gets better, but we do need more partners who can just make sure that we have better safeguards to protect those who are accessing things on media.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great segue to bringing you into this, Pooja, and asking you sort of, I know that it's especially, in many ways, it's been a fine line to walk for the last few years of wanting to, handle the threat of misinformation and disinformation, but doing so in a way that is, seen as equitable and, not exclusionary. So just curious, your own experience at Airbnb, especially over the past few years, how you all have tackled this issue of mis and disinformation and the impact it might have on, guests of different communities who might be affected in particular.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This, one example of misinformation on Airbnb came up during COVID. In an effort to avoid misinformation on health and travel advisories related to COVID-19, we wanted to really stick to citing to the experts, right? Providing guidance under our content policy to help protect our community. We specifically disallowed listings and profiles that provide any fraudulent, false, misleading, or deceptive information. Any harassing, trolling, repeatedly targeting community members, absolutely not tolerated. They'd be removed from our platform immediately. We really, this was such a humbling experience for Airbnb as well as others, I'm sure. We're not an expert in public health and infectious diseases, but we thankfully had the resources to partner with the experts. So at the time, we partnered with the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, and other leading experts in hospitality and medical hygiene to provide health and safety information, such as the best ways to clean a listing, how much time should one wait before allowing guests. And as you can imagine, this advice evolved over time, and thankfully we had the consultation of these experts to stay up to date.
Excellent. And I think that's a really good example of how companies can be sources of public health information that is objective and a resource to everybody without it crossing any lines. So really helpful to hear that example in particular. So look, I think a topic nowadays that gets pulled into every conversation that has anything to do with tech is the explosive growth of AI and the role that it has on everything. But I'm curious, in particular, the topics that we've already talked about today with respect to trust and safety, digital well-being, the spread of misinformation and disinformation. How do you all think the explosion of AI, in particular generative AI, will have an effect on the topics we've already discussed? Kyle, from your perspective, is it going to worsen the impact on our elections and democratic institutions? Jenny, from your standpoint, things that have been done around the intersection of AI and misinformation and disinformation and its effect on API communities in particular. I just wanted to throw that question out there. Jenny, perhaps I can call on you first.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, as we see with other types of technology, generative AI is trained on data that reflects all of the biases and racism and sexism of the real world. And so there are unfortunately many examples of how this explicitly harms Asian American communities. So there are a lot of stereotypes about Asian Americans. And so systems that are trained on this biased data, for example, that might dehumanize and hypersexualize Asian American women, means that when it comes to a image generator, if you were to feed it a seemingly innocuous prompt, such as like, draw me a picture of an Asian American woman, could definitely lead and lean into existing stereotypes that portray very harmful stereotypes about our community. And then from a mis and disinformation perspective, in terms of the kinds of things that circulate in language, there are really alarming statistics about how many generative AI tools are more likely to generate falsehoods in languages other than English. So, for example, if you were to give something like ChatGPT a prompt and ask it a question, if you were to do that prompt in Vietnamese, it's more likely to spit out something that's not true than if you were to ask that same prompt in English, for example. And then, as the case with a lot of technology as well, is right that this just changes the scale at which disinformation can spread. So thinking about how a lot of mis and disinformation is generated right now, it's a lot of bad actors using a lot of different resources to put out content. And specifically when it comes to content in Asian languages, what we see is that it's oftentimes translations of what's out there in English. So and I'm sure Kyle can touch more on this, but with regards to election information, right, it's specific pieces of falsehoods that are circulating in English already, like a video, for example, and then there's subtitles added, or a direct quote tweet with just a translation. So we could definitely see how that could be weaponized when you use a tool like ChatGPT or other sorts of automated tools that with a few clicks of a mouse or keyboard, you could translate at a large scale and very easily misinformation into specific languages. So yeah, it's definitely something that we are thinking about all the time and trying to think about different creative ways to fight back against it, because as you mentioned, it seems like generative AI is everywhere. It's super prevalent across all aspects of modern society today. So
Yeah, thanks for that. And one thing in particular that you mentioned was the ways in which generative AI, especially when it's not built in an inclusive way, can lead to almost the erasure of unique identities. I think you mentioned in particular the ways in which, Asian American folks end up having their identity in some ways erased when generative AI is applied to them, especially when it comes to imagery, which I think ties a lot into, Jill, maybe the work that you do with young people on being their authentic selves, the ways in which, beauty standards are affected by neurotechnology and the spread of like the ideal image. Generative AI, it seems like, has the potential to exacerbate this already existing issue, which is that young people, if they don't see themselves as they are online, they may be less, their digital well-being is in danger. Would you say that's an accurate statement? And how what's been your experience on these topics? Maybe not even just generative AI, but more generally with beauty standards and things like that.
Yeah, everything you said, like I wholeheartedly agree, and that's things that have come up with amongst our youth ambassadors, amongst themselves in conversation, as well as like with their peers, is honestly, when it boils down to it, is what is considered beautiful, right? Who considers me beautiful? Why are certain images, whether it's AI generated, why is that considered the standard? And how do I, as a youth, see myself reflected in those individuals? Part of our when I think of our mission, like, so a lot of the roots of like what we're talking about does stem from white supremacy, the model minority myths, xenophobia, racism, like things, whether it is AI or any other platform, it's a similar challenge. How can we as individuals, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, whatever we identify as such, consider ourselves beautiful and enough? Right. And so I do think like with AI, it worries me. We as an organization haven't peeled back the layers just enough, but we want to, because we know that youth are being immersed in this world where what is being digitized, what is being much more less, dare I say, less Asian, right? Like how can we look much more like what is considered gorgeous and beautiful, whether it's the color of our skin, the way our eyes look, or these physical features that traditionally is considered much more appropriate for society. Those are things that we're trying to combat. We want you to look themselves in a mirror, unfiltered, and look and consider themselves, I am who I am, and I should be proud. I am proud of who I am, and not let these AI or these other technologies change that so that they are conforming to the standard. But if anything, at the bottom line, they are the standard, right?
Thanks, Jill. I think that's super important to add that human face of the stakes that are. What's at stake when it comes to young people and their images of themselves, especially those in these communities. So that's a super helpful additional angle. We have just a few more minutes left. I wanted to jump to, asking you all, we've surfaced a lot of different issues and challenges that our communities are facing from different angles and perspectives. I did want to sort of end on a not positive note necessarily, but maybe a proactive note. So I'd love to kind of go around and hear from each of you. What are some concrete solutions in your mind that either government or the private industry or communities themselves can take to sort of better enhance and strengthen trust and safety, digital well-being for our communities? Pooja, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. So I think, from the very start, Airbnb has set itself apart in this sector by approaching policymakers, government regulators as partners. We've worked with thousands of governments around the world to enable healthy tourism that keeps trust and safety top of mind while keeping more of the economic benefits in the places where it happens. So, we are committed to working with policymakers by sharing best practices, by sharing, data when we can, to develop best practice frameworks and balance solutions to meet the unique needs of each community and help, residents benefit from home sharing.
I like that. Very practical, hands-on steps, and always appreciate the thoughtfulness here. Jenny, let me go to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the $1 million question, right? Like, how do we solve these really broad, big picture questions? So with regards to the platforms themselves, and I think a lot of the issues we talked around trust and digital wellness, it's unfortunately really well documented that these different social media platforms, for example, are bad at detecting mis and disinformation in English, but they're much worse when it comes to non-English languages and specifically Asian languages. And in addition to that, there's a very alarming trend towards deregulation among these platforms. So for example, within the last few months, YouTube decided to stop moderating content around the big lie. Twitter, X, has started replatforming a lot of really known purveyors of misinformation. So I think we would just love for the platforms to take a more robust and proactive approach towards content moderation, and especially given the lack of transparency and the lack of insight that we as civil society have into how their algorithms work, how the actual content moderation process works on the back end. I think we think it's really important for the entire process itself. So everything from the algorithms that might flag specific keywords that are known to be associated with misinformation to content moderation, the actual human content moderators. Right now, it seems like a lot of the resources associated with those processes are focused on English language. And there's a real parity between the amount of resources that are dedicated to English and non-English languages. So definitely look towards the companies to invest more resources in that. And then just broadly, I think I'll briefly touch on how infrastructure and government regulation is an important part of this as well. So we talk a lot about generative AI and all of the kind of bells and whistles associated with this new emerging like sexy technology. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of Americans that don't even have access to basic internet, right? So funding renewal for things like the Affordable Connectivity Program and making sure that everyone has access to safe, reliable broadband is really important. And then finally, privacy legislation as well, just because in comparison to a lot of other places like the European Union, the United States has very paltry privacy legislation, and there's just a lack of robust, like comprehensive protections for citizens online. And there's a very strong connection between strong privacy and what we've been talking about on this panel today, digital wellness, trust, and safety. So those things really go hand in hand.
Thanks, Jenny. That was super comprehensive. A lot of really important solutions all there at once. Jill, let me go to you with the same question of solutions on your end.
Yeah, happy to. So, I mean, in short, what we are advocating for is more culturally responsive services, and where best to start but at schools. We encourage and demand that there are not only culturally responsive materials, curriculums that focus on our Asian American history. And I'm grateful and thankful that there are states who have passed laws in recent years that are requiring this type of curriculum in schools, but it's not just limited to Asian American history. It's everybody. It's Black history. It's Hispanic history. It's LGBTQ history. So the more diversity, the more intersectionality out there, we do believe that this can help ensure that when there's representation in a classroom where our youth are seeing themselves in the curriculum, both in person and online, that can help promote a better safety net and also, or excuse me, digital wellness, and where they can have like a much more inclusive environment where they can see themselves.
Absolutely. Kyle, I'm going to come to you with this last question, and then also I want you to help kick us off for the final round of questions. So first, we'd love to hear from your end. Solutions that you see from your end at API Vote, and then also more generally, as we wrap up the session, what do you think is most important for the audience to take away from the session? And it can be tied also to your solutions.
Of course. Thank you so much for the question. I think, kind of everyone has suggested to, varying degrees. A lot of this will take a top-down approach, requiring accountability and change from social media companies and holding other irresponsible outlets and bad actors responsible. But, here at API Vote, those are some very big changes. And so we believe there's some things that we can do in the meantime to try and mitigate the pandemic of disinformation that we see online, especially as it pertains to our community. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, we do a lot of monitoring of different narratives and topics, and we want to make sure that we are informing our networks, our key players of what's going on, right? What are people talking about? How are people being misinformed? How are all that good stuff, right? And we're not just like informing them of what's going on, but we're actively assisting them with like communication recommendations and helping people to understand what is worth responding to and what's not worth responding to. And so with this information, we are better equipping folks to respond to disinformation and problematic content when it's appropriate, and not just kind of like fact check, but also put out content that, while it may not necessarily like be like this particular fact that's wrong, it's putting out good information out there in general, to make sure that people have access to that, especially when it comes to in-language content, because a lot of people who don't have English proficiency, even if you have the fact-checking content, that's not going to matter if they can't read it, right? And we also are adamant on finding trusted messengers, so these messages and content are coming from the right people. And of course, we are a strong believer in just the simple reporting of problematic stuff. So those are just some things that we're doing in the meantime in preparation for the upcoming elections. And again, as I mentioned earlier, like these type of disinformation efforts work. We did see a change from 2016 to 2020. It is a group effort, but we all play a part in it. And that's something we're very proud to be a part of. In terms of, I guess, something to take away, I think one of the most important things when talking about this information is, for AAPI communities, it's kind of a two-ended problem where we are being targeted with particular narratives. Often this might include like misleading claims about communism and socialism because of a lot of immigrants' background, stuff about affirmative action. We have stuff like the Men's Rights Asians movement online. So we have those kind of things that target our communities. And then, of course, we have narratives about us. And, I don't think I need to explain too much about how a lot of disinformation about COVID-19 led to a rise in anti-Asian hate. And of course, this rise in kind of anti-China rhetoric has led to, a lot of xenophobic feelings around the country. So when we talk about this information, we can never just look at it at face value. It's important to understand that already marginalized communities face a unique and arguably heavier brunt of the disinformation pandemic. And you always have to look at this issue with an intersectional lens.
Thanks, Kyle. Super important to always take a holistic view of the impact on both our communities and those that affect our communities. Pooja, can I go to you for final thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. So as a private sector company that connects people in real life, I think ownership and accountability are paramount, right? We have a responsibility to take an open and honest look internally on potential weaknesses and vulnerabilities. We can also lean on experts from various types of organizations and diverse fields to help guide our work and thinking. And I think lastly, partner and communicate on best practices and lessons learned with government stakeholders are also paramount.
Thanks, Pooja. Jenny.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up by saying that I think there's oftentimes this idea of Asian Americans as universally high achieving, highly educated, successful, and especially tech savvy. And despite the fact that there's such disparity within the community itself, and how the model minority myth and other stereotypes that we've touched on throughout this panel paint a very misleading portrayal of a very diverse and vibrant community. So I think it's difficult for people to understand that many Asian Americans are impacted by misinformation, lack internet access, might not feel safe online. So I think I would like to stress the importance of keeping that in mind and understanding how we as Asian Americans are also really impacted by these issues that aren't necessarily portrayed as issues that impact us.
Thanks, Jenny. Jill, let's close with you.
Related to solutions. So it's just solutions.
Yeah, what would you like the audience to take away as a final thought?
The first and foremost, I always have to share this, which is we all have a role in ending bullying and harassment. We can be upstanders, we can be those who are promoting positivity and just general kindness. I think like the major takeaway from this is that what I've seen is youth is shouldering a lot of this work on their own, and they don't have to be alone. We as adults, we as grown-ups, we as parents have a role to make sure that they are not only seeing model practices, but are also feeling safe. So although I am a big proponent of youth who are strong leaders and who are helping create a community and culture that is a positive change that will be reflective of every one of us, we as grown-ups, we have a responsibility for the future generations. Like, how are we responding to the way they are seeing the world? How are they seeing themselves as beautiful? Why do they feel a need to use social media to take back their power? And a lot of it has to do with, are we making sure that they feel safe? Are we making sure that we provide mental health resources for them so that they know who and where and how they can like seek help? So I hope that's the biggest takeaway, which is all of us, we have to do this together collectively to end bullying and hate, and also like ensure that digital wellness happens for everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jill. That's a great place to end. And I just want to thank all of you for bringing such diverse and unique perspectives. I mean, I think if there's any through line here through all the different topics we touched on in our brief time together, it's that, you know, whether we're talking about policy or products, government or private sector, the communities themselves that are most underrepresented and most impacted have to be centered in all this work. Even the best of intentions without inclusion of our communities at every step of the process, even the best intentions will fall short, especially when it comes to emerging technology. So I want to thank all of you for burning that torch and for advocating on behalf of your communities, both within the advocacy space and within the tech industry. And I hope that folks watching this have learned a lot and will understand that there's so many pieces to this puzzle, but at the end of the day, digital well-being, digital wellness for our communities is paramount. And when we all work together to advocate for that, we will all win. So thank you so much for joining this panel. Kyle, Jill, Pooja, Jenny, really appreciate it. And we'll see you all later. Bye.
What a great summit we've had together. I hope you've learned as much as I have from our amazing panelists and speakers over these past 2 days. We greatly appreciate our summit partners, Amazon, Apple, AT&T, Comcast, CTIA, Dell, DoorDash, Toyota, Charter, Entertainment Software Association, Microsoft, Netflix, Salesforce, T-Mobile, as well as all of our panelists, moderators, and special guest speakers. Your support enables APAICS to fulfill its mission of promoting Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander participation and representation at all levels of the political process, from community service to elect office. Please visit www.apaics.org to learn more about our work, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.